Next topic is dropping number of affordable rent homes. So let's provide a little bit of background in how affordable housing industry works. You have experience with affordable housing and actually developing it.
Yes.
Also, so
Well,
why don't you break that down?
to kind of put things in context, there was an article that came out that essentially said that a lot of low-income subsidized properties or apartment buildings, the owners on those properties are electing not to renew their contracts. And so to really understand that what that means, you got to go back to the beginning on originally how that particular apartment complex was developed. And a lot of times these low-income housing or subsidized housing are developed with tax credits, and they'll target specific groups like, very low income, mid to low income, senior housing, things of this nature. And essentially what the government will do is they'll issue tax credits. Tax credits are sold on a secondary money market. So if you're issued $3 million of tax credits, you'll turn around and sell that to some big company like Apple or Microsoft, who will want to buy those tax credits that are worth $3 million for something like $2.8 million or $2.7 million.
So there's a whole market for buying and trading tax credits.
Yes, there is. My personal experience was I had an office in Richmond, which at the time had an enterprise zone, and so I was eligible for tax credits for my own employees. And again, for those who don't understand tax credits versus tax write-offs are tax credits are a dollar for dollar deduction on what you actually owe after you've taken all your deductions. So putting things in perspective, when you build an apartment building or complex targeted to specific low-income groups, whether they're seniors or whether they're low-income housing or very low income, and you get these tax credits, it enables you to build a very nice facility. However, when you do that, you turn around and you sign these long-term contracts to keep this particular complex low-income housing. And
we're talking about 20 to 30-year contracts.
Correct. They're like 20 to 30-year contracts. And so after 20 or 30 years, you always have the right to renew the contract with HUD or decide to just go fair market. And again, the big drawback is that the HUD only has very low bumps and increases for rent, so anywhere from like 2.8 to 2.9 or 3%. And so when you have
even worse when they're cut in funding.
Exactly, even worse when they're cut in funding. And so when you have an apartment complex that was geared towards some type of a low-income bracket or senior housing, and now 20 years or 30 years have passed from when the original developer took tax credits to help build that facility, and now it's located right in the urban infill areas or where all the action's happening and all the .coms or IPOs are taking place. Suddenly, if they break that entire contract with HUD, they can have a empty building that goes right to fair market. And a lot of these buildings that were subsidized through tax credits using HUD money to build them up, they're gorgeous buildings. I mean,
and they're exempt from rent control.
They're exempt from rent control. In fact, there's a building right now where it's just a raw piece of land in Concord that I'm working on. I'm representing the owner, and the buyer, who's represented by another company, is a nonprofit. That nonprofit is actually eligible to take tax credits. And so, for example, just to make the long story short, they can build a $23 million building, a 62-unit building in downtown Concord, equip it with gym and educational centers, primarily geared towards senior housing, whereas when I run the numbers on the exact building, I have to stay within a budget of 18 to 19 million. So they can build this facility 2 to 3 times more expensive and still let it pencil because they're getting these tax credits. Now, of course, when they do that, they're going to have to tie themselves to these long-term contracts, 15, 20, 30-year contracts, which at some point in the future will expire. And that's what we're talking about here, is that some of those buildings that were once used or built through subsidized housing tax credits, they're now expiring. And they're located in places like San Francisco, Oakland. And so simply put, it's just not advantageous for the owners of that to renew the contracts, especially when you have such a shortage of housing in the Bay Area.
Now, what do you think HUD can do, or any other city, or how can you entice landlords to renew, or what other kind of subsidy would they need to say, yeah, we'll keep this as affordable housing?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, and I hate to say it like this, but it's a matter of being able to have a higher competitive market rent. And again, the rents in the Bay Area are really high, and you got this dichotomy between trying to keep the rent low and subsidized from the government, which comes out of people like you and I's pockets from our taxes that we pay, and then this other aspect trying to raise the rents to what they should be based on what the market will bear. So again, whenever these things happen and they don't renew these contracts for low income housing for the entire building, it doesn't mean that that building is still not going or willing to accept places like or things like Section 8, right? So you could still go primarily market rent and still decide to rent out a majority of them to Section 8 housing, which actually stays pretty close to fair market rent values.